Labadiena! In this video I'm gonna be making an oak conference table. But first of all, I would like to give full credit for the company whose design I will be mimicking. Great job, OkOak. Wonderful design, guys. So, I think there's not that much to explain. So, let's dive into the build, shall we? I'm starting the build with metal cleanup. And this may look a bit odd, but I will explain why. So, I decided to leave the sequence of procedures the way I built the table, and I will explain why I did that. So I'm starting with the metal part or the metal legs because I was on a quite tight schedule for this build. So I'm starting with the metal part because I will have to bring it to be powder coated, and I wasn't really sure how long will the powder coating take, so I wanted to make the legs as quick as possible and move to the tabletop. Okay, let's talk about the legs. So all of the pieces were cut from 12mm sheet steel. I made a drawing and I ordered the plasma cutting on the other company. Now I received these plates, and all that's left to do is assemble those. So there was a bit of a problem putting these together because the plasma cut on this thick steel was a bit angular, and I wasn't able to finger joint those pieces. So I had to grind a bit, but I made it work without a big problem. It was still a lot easier and faster to assemble with these finger joints, plus they added a lot of structural stability, and welding was an ease as well. After the welding was finished, I noticed an issue. The top plates were slightly bowed, and I don't think I had anything to do with that. I believe that came from the plasma cutting company, because you see, in the end there was a lot of heat concentration while cutting those finger joints, and I believe that may have caused this warp. Anyhow, I had to fix it, and I knew the trick that by alleviating the stresses in the plate you can straighten things out. So I added the clamps on the bottom of the legs, forcing it into the right direction, and applied some heat, and that seemed to work, even though it didn't came to its initial state, but it was good enough for the table base and for my needs. The fabrication part of the build was finished, or so I thought. Well, it will come clear in the end. Anyhow, so those were in the powder coating facilities, and now I'm starting working on the tabletop. So first of all, I had to flatten these three rather huge white oak slabs, and I decided to do that with the wide weld sander. I will not use any jointer or thickness planer. I will go straight onto the wide weld sander, and the main reason is that it's a lot easier with this machine, but you have to have a certain belt. I have this very coarse belt. It's 24 grit. I couldn't get any coarser in the belt provider I have, but they said that it will be plenty, and it is actually. I can remove up to 1mm of material with a single pass, which is a huge amount for the wide weld sander. And just by flipping the piece, I was able to straighten the slab. Of course, I have to pick rather straight slabs. I can't use really heavily warped slabs, but if the slab is rather fine and okay, then this technique works really great. I no longer have to worry about tear outs or snips or whatever these are called. So yeah, I love this machine, and plus as you can see, I was able to do this single-handedly. when doing it on the jointer, for example, is really a difficult task. What I meant saying single-handedly was that the flattening was done alone, and of course I asked for help if there was a person around. Anyhow, so I have the table layout on the floor, and it's a lot wider than it's supposed to be, so I'm marking the lines where the cuts should be with the chalk line, and then I move the slabs onto the panel saw and make the cuts. But first of all, before going straight onto the line, I cut the majority of the waste away, removing any stresses from the wood, and only then I make a skim cut. And if this works out well, the edge is as crisp as from the jointer, and I no longer have to do an extra step. I can go straight to the glue up. And obviously I have to repeat this procedure on all 3 slabs. And once this is done, the next step is to check if the cuts are okay, because sometimes there's some issues. The wood just warps after cutting some material away, or some blade deflection happens and things like that. So I always check the fit up, and it seems okay. So I mark the places for the dominoes, and for the depth I decided to go with the maximum capacity of the machine, which is 7 centimeters, I believe. And that's because I found some cracks on the end of on 2 ends of the slabs, and I measured that it's possible to go through the crack with the domino, so I decided why not to do that and gain some extra support from that domino. And some of you might be wondering, where will I get the dominoes of this length? So Festool sells dominoes in sticks, so you just chop it at the length you want, and it's so handy that the sticks already have a ruler pressed into the wood, so no measuring needed. Anyhow, so I prepared the dominoes and started the glue up. It was really hot and humid evening that day, so glue up was a nightmare. I used the polyurethane glue to extend the glue up time, but it was still too short, and I had to rush really fast because the glue started to set, and I was really worried that this whole project might go to scrap. But it worked out, luckily. The other issue I was facing was with the ends, but I was no longer stressing because the glue up was done. I wasn't able to compress the end clamp tight enough because of these cracks. These were working as a spring, and my seams were still not tight enough, so I drove these wedges, and that solved the problem. This is the other day, and the tabletop is looking mint. The glue up ended up really well. There's basically no seams visible, and the grain color and orientation is so perfect that you can't basically tell that it's glued from three different pieces. Anyhow, like I mentioned before, some of the dominoes were going through the cracks, and because of that I had a lot of polyurethane glue in some of the cracks, so I had to clean that stuff out. Once the tabletop was relatively clean, I asked my colleague to help me out to sand this even. There was some inconsistencies in the tabletop, so why not to use the white belt sander when you have it in the workshop. And honestly, we maxed out the machine. The width was the maximum capacity the machine can handle, which is 110 centimeters. The tabletop is heading to completion, so I'm sanding some low spots on the bottom side of the table, removing the bark. I found some rotten spots on the edge, so I chopped these away as well. And now we flip the table, and I had to brush the whole surface with this wire brush. I mean nylon brushing machine, which is basically removes the soft material from the surface, exposing the grain and creating this textured surface. And it works wonderfully on the softer woods. It's a bit more difficult and a bit more work on oak, but it also leaves a great appearance, great effect, and it's terribly hard to do it on ash. I'm not sure what's different in these pieces. The hardness is almost the same, but we worked with the ash and it was a nightmare. Anyhow, I digress a bit. So once the tabletop was brushed, I marked the center line and created a 90-degree mark off of that center line, and now I had my markings for the cuts, and I could easily measure the length of the table and cut it to the final dimension. And then I sanded the cuts because there was some burn marks left, and of course I had to brush it again with the same machine. I have already received the legs from the painting facilities. These are looking great. So I placed the legs on the bottom side of the table. I marked the location of it. I also marked the location of the holes where the threaded inserts should end up. So my idea was to drill the holes at this point a bit deeper, and then create a recess for the leg plate afterwards. And speaking of creating a recess, I decided to go with the copying ring. So if you have used this accessory for the router, you know that you have to measure the distance between the router bit you are using and the copying ring. So once I determined that distance, I marked it on the table and creating this template, jig, whatever you want to call it. Well, to put it simply, this template is ever so slightly larger than the recess. It should be to accommodate for that distance between the copying ring and the router bit. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, you saw that I glued a strip of the same material I used for the template in the middle of the recess area, just to work as a support for the router base, so it wouldn't tip over and make deeper cuts. And the rest was basically moving the router around and removing the material. And after that's done, all you have to do is remove that support structure, which took no more than a minute. I screwed down the threaded inserts into their locations, and it's basically done. The spot for the leg is prepared. And now I had to create a couple of holes in the middle of the table for the electrical boxes for PCs, etc. So I'm marking out the locations, and I will use the same technique as I used for the leg recesses. Just this time I will go all the way through the table. Okay, maybe this part needs some explanation. So as you can see, I haven't gone all the way through the thickness of the tabletop. I left like 5 millimeters from the top side, just to prevent any tear out. I drilled holes to mark the locations of the channels I created, and once I will finish the bottom side, I will flip the table and I will remove the material with the copying ring. It just seemed like a safer and cleaner procedure of creating these holes. The very last thing to do was to apply oil finish on the top side, and the tabletop is done, or so I thought. You see, when I made those holes in the middle, it somehow loosened the overall structure, and the tabletop warped a bit. So yeah, I had to create some sort of a spine, some structure which would stabilize the tabletop and make it flat again. And obviously the only way to go is to use steel. So my idea was to not only create a structure to stabilize the tabletop, but also to create a channel for the wires, because when I install those boxes, you know, the wires will be dangling under the table, and some kind of a channel would help a lot. So that was my idea, to create a channel which would enclose all of the wires and also add an extra stability for the tabletop. The channel is almost finished. I double checked if it fits okay under the table, and then I moved to the painting booth to spray paint it. Basically there was no time left to be powder coated, so that's why I used spray paint. It's durable enough, I believe, for such application, because it will not be touched or abused too much. Plus this paint is fairly durable, it's just a bit weaker than powder coating. Anyhow, so that was done, and now I decided to add a recess for that channel, just for a bit of a cleaner look, because I made recesses for the legs, and I thought, why not to make some recesses for this channel as well. As you can see, I'm applying the last coat of oil, and that means this project is officially finished. So I sincerely thank you for being with me, and I really hope to see you soon. Bye bye!